In American history, Boston is where the Revolution ignites. But one of the most important early victories is the one many people barely remember. It is called Evacuation Day, and it was the first major moment that proved George Washington could actually win. Not with a dramatic charge or a famous duel, but with planning, patience, deception, and a move that forced the British to leave without a final slaughter. In March 1776, that mattered more than any speech, because the revolution was still fragile and could have cracked under fear. To understand Evacuation Day, you have to go back to the siege itself, because Boston was a trap with two locks. The British held the city, but the Patriots held much of the land around it, and both sides were staring at each other across frozen ground. After Lexington and Concord in the Battle of Bunker Hill, the British stayed in Boston, but they were not comfortable. If the Royal Navy could keep the harbor open, the British could survive. If the Patriots could close the harbor or threaten the fleet, the British position would become dangerous. This was the first lesson of the early war. Control of space was not just about armies, it was about geography. And Boston's geography was brutal, because whoever controlled the high ground controlled the city's fate. In 1775, the Patriot forces were real, but they were not yet a single disciplined army. They were a patchwork of militias with different leaders, different levels of training, and different ideas of authority. When Washington arrived to take command, he inherited not only a siege, but a chaos. He had to build an army while staring at an enemy that had professionals, artillery, and naval support. Washington's first challenge was simple. He needed time. Time to organize. Time to train. Time to create supply lines. Time to turn a crowd into a force. The second challenge was even harder. He needed gunpowder, because you cannot threaten a city with empty cannons. The Patriots were running low, and this fact alone could have ended the siege in humiliation. Meanwhile, the British were also trapped by reality, because holding Boston meant feeding and supplying thousands of troops and loyalist refugees in a city under pressure. Inside Boston, supplies tightened, prices rose, and fear lived in the streets. The British could strike out, but leaving the city's defenses exposed was risky. So both sides waited, and winter made everything slower and more dangerous. This is why Evacuation Day is not just a victory. It is a story about endurance. But endurance alone does not win wars, and Washington needed a breakthrough. That breakthrough came from a place many people forget: Fort Ticonderoga. Early in the war, Patriot forces captured artillery from Ticonderoga, but capturing guns is not the same as using them. The guns were far away, and winter roads were cruel. Then Henry Knox did something that sounds like a legend but was real. He hauled heavy artillery across frozen terrain to Boston. It was a logistical miracle, and logistics are often the real miracles of history. When those cannons arrived, the siege changed, because now Washington had the tools to threaten the British position for real. Still, the final move required more than cannons. It required the right ground. The key was Dorchester Heights, a high position south of Boston that overlooked the city and the harbor. If the Patriots could fortify Dorchester Heights, they could place artillery there. If artillery sat there, it could hit British ships and make the harbor unsafe. And if the harbor became unsafe, the British would have a terrible choice: fight uphill under fire or leave. But taking Dorchester Heights was dangerous, because if the British attacked immediately, the Patriots might be slaughtered before fortifications held. Washington understood the window was small, so he planned a night operation with speed and deception. On the night of March 4th into March 5th, 1776, Patriots moved onto Dorchester Heights. They carried tools, timber, and earthworks materials. They built defenses fast, using pre-made structures and smart engineering. They also used diversion tactics to distract the British and hide the true movement. By morning, the British woke up and saw a nightmare. Fortifications had risen where open ground had been. American guns could soon sit above the city like a raised fist. British commanders considered an assault, and the plan was to attack like they had at Bunker Hill. But Bunker Hill had been a warning, because the British won that battle at a terrible cost. Now the British were facing a similar uphill attack, but this time the Patriots would be better placed and better prepared. Then weather turned into history's silent soldier. A storm disrupted British plans and delayed their attack. Delay mattered, because every hour allowed the Patriots to strengthen defenses and dig deeper. By the time conditions cleared, Dorchester Heights was too strong to take cheaply, so the British faced the truth. Staying in Boston was no longer safe. If American artillery controlled the harbor, the fleet could be damaged or trapped. If the fleet was trapped, the whole army could be trapped. So the British chose evacuation. On March 17, 1776, British troops and many loyalists left Boston by ship. The city was freed without a final massacre. And that outcome was not an accident. It was Washington's victory of discipline, patience, and strategic pressure. This is why Evacuation Day matters, because it was the first major proof that the revolution could force the greatest empire on earth to retreat. It was not a symbolic retreat. It was a real withdrawal from a major city, and it gave the Patriots something priceless. Confidence. Confidence changes everything in war, because people fight longer when they believe victory is possible. It also shaped Washington's reputation early, because he was still being judged by whether he could lead an army, not just inspire one. Evacuation Day showed that he could coordinate logistics, intelligence, engineering, and morale into one effective move. It also showed the power of geography, because Dorchester Heights was the true weapon more than any single musket. It revealed another lesson. The British were strong, but they were not unstoppable. They could be forced to choose between bad options, and revolutions win when they force empires into bad options repeatedly. Boston's evacuation also changed the map of the war, because Britain shifted focus and later made New York a key base. That meant the war moved, not ended, and the struggle grew larger. But for the Americans in 1776, Boston was a message to the world. It said the rebellion was not just noise. It could organize, it could learn, and it could win. Boston also became memory, and memory becomes identity. In Massachusetts, Evacuation Day became a civic symbol of survival and success. It is still remembered, even if many outside Boston have never heard the name. So if you want to understand the early revolution, do not look only for the biggest battles. Look for the moments when a young army proves it can think. Evacuation Day is one of those moments. It is the story of Knox's artillery, Washington's patience, Dorchester Heights, and the storm that bought time. It is the story of forcing the British to leave without giving them the battle they wanted. And it is the story of the first major step from protests to real war-winning strategy. If you want more stories like this, like the video and subscribe to History Refuge.